Welcome to question period in the Alberta Legislature. My name is David Carter, Speaker of the House and MLA for Calgary-Egmont. After question period today, the House will be dealing with second readings of bills, committee of the whole stage, and perhaps even third readings of bills. The House will again reconvene this evening at 8 o'clock and probably sit quite late. As of today, there are 2 bills on notice, 8 at second reading stage, 18 at committee of the whole stage, and 16 at third reading stage. Again, as of this day, the House will tie the longest sitting record for consecutive days of a session, 67 days, and it is indeed likely that the House will not rise until sometime after the long weekend in July. Let us pray. O Lord, grant us a daily awareness of the precious gift of life which you have given us. As members of this Legislative Assembly, we dedicate our lives anew to the service of our province and our country. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Member for Red Deer South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request leave to introduce Bill 60, being the Regulations Amendment Act 1988. Mr. Speaker, what this will do is allow for a revision and a consolidation of the existing regulations as well as a tightening up of the definition of regulation.
The Honourable Member for Red Deer South has moved first reading of Bill 63, Regulations Amendment Act 1988. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
Bill number 63, Regulations Amendment Act 1988, introduced by the Honourable Member Mr. Oldring, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports. Introduction of special guests.
Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker and members of the Legislative Assembly, I would like to introduce a very special guest today. She is in the Members Gallery. Her name is Mrs. Lisa Properzi of Westlock, and she is the recipient of the 1988 4-H Premier's Award. This award was presented to Lisa because of her participation and achievements in 4-H, as well as her involvement in other community organizations. Mr. Speaker, we had the opportunity to have the Premier make the official presentation to her earlier. She is joined by her parents, Rhea and Les, her sisters Shelley, Annette, and her brother Gregory. We would ask them to rise so that we could extend to them the very warm welcome of this Legislative Assembly, plus our warmest congratulations.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker.
Procedure for half a moment to thank your Leader of the Opposition. Government House Leader, I move to regularize the bill.
With apologies, Mr. Speaker, I would move that Bill 63 be placed on the order paper for second reading under Government Bills and Orders.
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried. Thank you. Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'll try again. My question is, Mr. Speaker, is to the Minister of Energy. Mr. Speaker, there is now a certain irony as we listen to the Minister of Energy pontificate on the subject of deregulation of natural gas. Mr. Speaker, the Minister is now trying to explain to Albertans, as the owners of the natural gas resources, why they should be delighted with the prospect of Ontario customers buying more gas from a U.S. source and less from Alberta. Mr. Speaker, I think the Minister's new view can be summed up as deregulation, but only if it's carefully regulated, Mr. Speaker. And I would say to this Minister that deregulation of gas has been a triumph of ideology over common sense. But my question to the Minister, Mr. Speaker, is this. At what point does the government abandon its experiment with deregulation and recognize that hanging on to our traditional markets is more important than espousing a right-wing philosophy?
Well, Mr. Speaker, 3 Western provinces and the federal government agreed to a process of natural gas deregulation, as the Honourable Leader well knows. If we had gone to what I think he's advocating, that complete deregulation, if we were going to go that direction, which would have meant chaos in the marketplace and prices being driven down even further than what they did go down because of the collapse in world oil prices. So we went through a transition period when we were trying to keep contracts in place and prices in the core market up to a point which would respect the long-term nature of them. So, Mr. Speaker, we certainly did not advocate deregulation completely immediately. It was a process that would occur over a period of time. And now, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is referring to a specific situation where Union Gas, while they're in negotiations with the Western Gas Marketing in Western Canada, they're negotiating a new contract for the 1st of November of this coming year. And I'm guessing that there might be some ploy with respect to those negotiations to talk about all the gas they can get in from the United States. But as I understand it, it would be short-term gas used for storage purposes in the summertime. Now, Mr. Speaker, it is our objective to go to deregulation where buyers and sellers can enter into contracts. And if that's the case, then Union Gas should be able to, if they respect their existing contracts, to get some interruptible gas on a short-term basis from wherever they want. And that is the context in which I've made my remarks in a public way.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Minister's well aware we've never supported deregulation. We thought it was a disaster, and it has been, Mr. Speaker. But Minister says that this is just a ploy. Well, I notice now that the Ontario utilities, he mentioned Union Gas, are spearheading a purchasing consortium to increase their purchasing clout. At the same time, they are backing a new pipeline proposal into their markets from Michigan. He may well think it's a ploy, Mr. Speaker, but I hope he has a better answer to this question. Will the Minister advise then what analysis he has made of the effect of these new arrangements on the Alberta industry, and more importantly, what follow-up action he has taken?
Well, Mr. Speaker, now that the honourable member has clarified that he supports regulation, putting back in place, I presume, an Alberta border price, which, of course, would be what the industry does not want and what would shut us out of North American markets. And, Mr. Speaker, the potential in this province for continued expansion, exploration, and development in the gas industry is tremendous. And we are looking forward to the future demands of natural gas from the United States. And those demands are showing up now in terms of consumers in the United States wanting to enter into long-term contracts. And, Mr. Speaker, that is the problem that we're having right now with Ontario, in that they are not accepting our position that we should have long-term contracts for gas supplied into the core market. However, I have to say that I think we made some progress in the last 2 meetings I've had with the Minister from Ontario. So the best protection that consumers can have for their long-term security of supply of natural gas is to contract long-term. That's happening in the markets into the United States now, and it's happening to some degree in central Canada, but not to the degree that we want. However, Western Gas Marketing, as I indicated earlier, are negotiating right now with the utilities in Ontario, the utilities in Manitoba, and also Quebec. In fact, they're very close to an agreement with the negotiations with respect to the contract in Quebec. Mr. Speaker, one more point that's important here. The Quebec government has recognized the importance of long-term contracts, recognized the importance not only to their own consumers, but to our producers as well. So they have introduced legislation which would require direct sales into the core market, to require long-term contracts to be put in place, similar to what are in place between the utilities and Western Gas Marketing.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's very well and dandy about Quebec, but we're talking about Ontario, and that's one of our biggest markets, Mr. Speaker. And I take it seriously that they're looking towards the United States, and we could lose their traditional markets. Now, the minister refers to the meeting that he had with his Ontario counterpart, and he says he's making some progress. Well, Mr. Speaker, my question is, aside from a cordial meeting, and the minister says that he's making some progress, will the minister admit that he has failed to obtain a specific commitment from his counterpart that the Ontario government will require utilities to honor and maintain the existing system of long-term contracts with their producers? Will he admit that?
No, Mr. Speaker. If the honourable member thinks that Ontario can look to security of supply by going south of the border in the future, then he's dead wrong. Because consumers in the United States will be looking elsewhere for security of supply, and they'll be looking in this direction. The Ontario distributors are negotiating, as I indicated right now, and looking to long-term contracts with our producers in Western Canada. In terms of looking to direct sales to occur into that core market, we are saying that those direct sales should be long-term contracts as well. Quebec has accepted that. We think Manitoba will accept that, and it's accepted in this province. And in terms of Ontario, the Ontario Energy Board are having hearings this summer, going on in July and August, to address this question of security of supply. My discussions with the Ontario minister were such that I'm hopeful that we would have them move closer to our position as a result of those hearings.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, I might remind you about your long-term contracts with the United States. That'd be at bargain basement prices. What did they do before? They tore them up when it wasn't, when they didn't want them any longer, Mr. Speaker. So we're talking about this traditional market in Ontario. Now, the minister has answered all over the field, but I want to know specifically then, what has the Ontario minister said to this minister that would lead him to some optimism they talked about? I see no room for optimism at this particular time.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition never seems room for optimism in any topic, as I can tell. In fact, grossly shows his ignorance of a topic when he talks about bargain basement pricing into the United States for long-term contracts. Our best contracts are into the California market and the markets into the United States. Those long-term contracts are at higher prices than what we're getting for gas contracted in this country. And Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is dead wrong when he's on that topic. So, Mr. Speaker, we are looking to markets in Ontario. They're important to us, yes. And I believe that through further discussions with Ontario, we will arrive at a point where we'll find a position satisfactory to both of us.
Thank you. Calgary-Buffalo supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's clear that we gave up our cards and bargaining position by the stupid way in which we deregulated in 1985, and now we're skipping rope to the Ontario government's tune. Can the minister tell us how much he calculates will be the cost to the Alberta Treasury? What's at stake if the government of Ontario forces the provincial government to live up to its foolish agreement to deregulate, and the core market in Ontario is opened up to short-term sales?
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is showing lack of knowledge on the topic. In fact, any public comments he's made in the last few days would make me wonder whether he's supporting the minister from Ontario and the consumer's position in wanting to have lower prices into their markets. And I've had some concerns expressed with that, wondering where his position is in this province. With respect to the core market in Ontario, we are suggesting, and a position we're taking very firmly, is that sales into the core market must be in the term of long-term contracts. And that's a position we're holding in this province, and one that we are insisting upon in that province. And we have our gas removal permit system in place, where we're using that to make sure that the prices in the core market will not come down to the prices that are in the industrial market.
Second main question, member for Red Deer South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the Minister of Energy, and he's touched on it already when he briefly commented on the California marketplace. Could he indicate, as one example, what percentage of the California natural gas marketplace is being provided for by the province of Alberta?
Well, Mr. Speaker, our Canadian gas going into the United States make up about 4 to 5% of the U.S. market. Into the California market, it would be closer to 10%. And particularly in the northern part of the state, it would be higher than that.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate my second question, the member from Edmonton Millwoods.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct a series of questions to the Minister of Advanced Education. In recent weeks, we've heard numerous reports from officials at the University of Alberta that the current level of provincial support for the university is such that it's compromising the university's ability to provide a quality education to its students. In fact, earlier this month in his 88th convocation address to the students, President Meyer Horowitz said that unless there is a greater degree of provincial support, the university will be facing an unprecedented accumulated deficit of $7 million by March 31st. My question to this minister is simply this. How much more evidence does he and his government need to have before he recognizes the financial crisis facing Alberta's oldest and senior university and takes some appropriate action?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the situation that the honourable member refers to is certainly not as grave or as critical as he would attempt to paint. I'm keeping in close contact with the boards and the senior administration of the universities, not just the University of Alberta, but the other institutions in the province as well. And our commitment is there that if they fulfill and meet the challenge of doing some belt tightening and fiscal restraint, that we will not see the system seriously harmed in any way. And the government stands behind that commitment. And the evidence that we have and is carefully gathered certainly doesn't agree with what the honourable member opposite is saying.
A supplementary question, talking about evidence, can the minister tell us what he's going to do, what his response is to the student union's brief that was presented to him recently on behalf of 22,000 undergraduate students asking for government action on the financial crisis? Is he going to simply ignore that?
Well, Mr. Speaker, again, the honourable member insists on using the word financial crisis. And in speaking with the students, it's been my experience that they understand what a very good deal they are getting here in the province of Alberta when they pursue their higher education. It's not matched anywhere else in Canada, either by the fees that are charged or the services given. So I don't know what nonsense the honourable member is referring to.
Okay, so he's going to ignore the undergraduate students, 22,000 of them, Mr. Speaker. But let me ask him this. Is he going to also ignore the graduate students in their brief that was given to him, the next decade of deficit that the university is looking at? Is he going to just turn his nose up at them as well?
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course we're not turning our nose up at any brief or presentation which is made. And I'm aware of the position taken by the president of the University of Alberta, and of course he wouldn't be doing his job if he wasn't publicly seeking more funds for his institution. And university presidents across the country are doing that. But we have a large commitment and a big financial investment to the post-secondary system, and we'll stand behind that commitment.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Given the government's fixation on cutting back in education at the same time that they're giving out millions to their pals like Peter Pocklington, can the Minister of Advanced Education advise the House whether or not he intends to comply with recommendation A1, the first one in the Caring and Commitment report that was tabled last week in the legislature that called for increased, let me underline that, Mr. Speaker, increased funding for the universities to provide more graduate programs for their nursing program.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member neglects to mention that there was an increase this year in all faculties. And the specific recommendation in that report, of course, will be responded to and dealt with at such time as the government responds to the report generally. While I'm on my feet, I'd like to just respond to a point the honourable member has made. I don't know why he did it, and I'm sure he didn't mean to. You know, he talks about the government's friend, Mr. Pocklington, and of course, Mr. Pocklington can't respond because he's not in the House. But, well, let's see what Mr. Pocklington donated to the University of Alberta this year. Now, let's see. Now, I know the socialists over there don't like the idea of the private sector turning a profit and turning it back to their community, and they neglected to mention the fact, just a minute.
Order, please. Order. Order, Honourable Minister. Perhaps the Minister could give the sum total in a hurry. We could get on with the rest of the question period, please.
I was looking for it here. It's right next to the Grant Notley Chair in Political Science donation. Political Chair in Business, $100,000. Now, I know you don't like to be reminded of those things, but I think in fairness to the citizens of Alberta that are making those donations to our advanced educational institutions, that occasionally somebody should speak up and defend those citizens.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary question to the Minister. In light of the fact that many of the American universities are having the same problems we are here in Alberta and in Canada with funding, can the Minister, and they're going to endowments and going to private sector and to alumni, can the Minister bring us up to date how the 3U program has gone, and is there an extension of that or something to replace that so that you can make donations from the private sector?
Well, that's an excellent question, Mr. Speaker, because of course when the honourable member previous talked about financial support, he neglected to mention that special endowment fund. We committed $80 million over the rest of the decade, and all but $2 million of that $80 million has been allotted and subscribed to, a tremendous infusion above and beyond the ordinary government budget for the department. So that in turn has enriched our system way beyond that experienced by any other province.
Calgary Buffalo.
Thank you. One of the things that the government doesn't like to advertise and that you won't see in their annual report is that 73% of our operating costs for our universities are paid for by the federal government. What I'm wondering about is how, and that's right, I'm wondering how the minister can say that education is a priority when we've had net cuts after inflation in our higher education funding over the last 7 years, and we have the lowest.
Thank you, Honourable Member. That's long enough for a supplementary. Honourable Minister.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I didn't get the question.
Perhaps we could have it succinctly.
I'm wondering how the minister can allege that education is a priority when we've had net cuts in funding after inflation over the last 7 or 8 years, and when we have the worst record of funding of any universities in Canada over the last 4 years, including the impoverished maritime universities.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that simply isn't correct.
Thank you. Member for Edmonton Gold Bar, main question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tragically, it appears that child abuse is increasing in our province, Mr. Speaker, and we don't have effective prevention programs or plans in place to deal with it. Mr. Speaker, recent statistics indicate that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 7 boys are victims of sexual abuse in Canada. This frightening problem has become epidemic, and it must be stopped. As a society, we can no longer ignore it. The time has come for action. My first question, Mr. Speaker, is to the Premier. Will the Premier commit his government to providing programs and resources for funding treatment and rehabilitation programs for abusers to prevent reoccurrence?
Mr. Speaker, obviously all members of the House would feel concern about either abuse of children or others in our society. It's impossible for any government or any group of citizens to in any way put together a series of circumstances where that would never happen. Nevertheless, you have to do all that you can. And through our Minister of Community and Occupational Health and our Minister of Social Services, the government's trying to do that.
Mr. Speaker, community organizations are ready and willing and are begging for support and leadership from the government. Will the Premier be willing to create a family therapy program? The Premier speaks often about his interest in family health. A family therapy program which could work to stop the vicious cycle of abused children who, when adults, become abusers themselves.
Well, I would, Mr. Speaker, certainly consider that.
Mr. Speaker, another one, this time to the Minister of Education. Will the Minister tell the House why the Minister allowed discontinuation of funding to the Catalyst Theatre, a very creative and effective mechanism to explain this issue to children and young people?
Mr. Speaker, there was no such thing as disallowance of funding. There was not any funding going to the Catalyst Theatre through the Department of Education. I can inform the honourable member that the performance which the Catalyst Theatre has, which has been successful in reaching young people with an important message, has now been produced in video form, which will be a resource available to all students in this province, as opposed to simply those few groups who were able to see the live production. I think, in fact, it's an important step in terms of how we can address a very serious issue in terms of access for all students province-wide.
Mr. Speaker, final summary. This is a shocking situation, and yet we don't seem to have any sense of developing a comprehensive plan. My last supplementary then, Mr. Speaker, hopefully it'll elicit more responses to the Minister of Social Services. Will the Minister of Social Services implement support programs in the province's women's shelters to provide emotional aid in the form of counseling and education for children who accompany their mothers to those shelters?
Mr. Speaker, some of that programming is presently available, as well as delivered through other organizations other than the shelters. I think the honourable member is certainly appropriately raising a very important concern and problem in this province. But I think, in fairness, the honourable member should also realize it is because of a huge effort by the provincial government and communities through various mechanisms that this problem is now coming to light. Mr. Speaker, it is only in the last several years that we have realized the magnitude of it. And a review of the myriad of programs that are presently delivered by community organizations and several government departments certainly leads us to the view that there has to be more coordination. And, Mr. Speaker, that is an effort that will be ongoing this summer with hopefully appropriate announcements this fall.
Edmonton Avonmore, Minister of Education, supplementary information.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, just to correct an incorrect statement which was made by the member for Edmonton Gold Bar, I can in fact advise that education grants do flow through to shelters for women who are there with their children in order that those children may access student programs through the school boards into which the jurisdiction is located.
To Edmonton Avonmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Solicitor General, inasmuch as sexual abuse of children is a crime, and that most offenders who are convicted of such crimes get provincial time, what kind of money or funds is he willing to commit to treatment programs for offenders while they're serving time, and for young offenders who have often been sexually abused prior to their offending?
Mr. Speaker, I concur with all speakers this afternoon that this is a very serious and alarming offense for anybody that's incarcerated in one of our provincial institutions. If they have that history, and with the psychological testing they undergo, there are programs presently for them, and also for the young offender if it is known that he has a history of being abused.
Member for Clover Bar, on behalf of the Representative Caucus, followed by Vermilion Viking and Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Honourable Solicitor General, and has to do with driving schools. In recent months, the government's been retesting drivers who've graduated from private driving schools, and they've been doing this on a random basis. I'd like to know if the Solicitor General can advise the legislature if he has any approximate number as to the number of students who go through the program and the ratio of failures when they're checked in the random testing to the number of people who take the lessons from private driving schools.
Mr. Speaker, I can't give the specific numbers. The random testing actually arose from a study done with the driving school associations and the Solicitor General's Department to determine A, new curriculum, and B, as to whether the testing that was being done was being adequately carried out. On both accounts, we found that we needed to develop a new curriculum, which is underway, and that testing generally was not of the caliber it should be, and that the government should reinstitute testing on its own, at least until there's a common standard amongst all schools. After having made that decision, we decided, at the behest of some of the smaller schools thinking they could respond to this, did some random testing to find out whether the testing was up to the standards. I'm pleased to say that in by far the majority of cases they were, but there was still some glaring examples of inadequate testing, and they've been retested.
Mr. Speaker, then with the minister's study, is he still going to allow the private sector to keep on with the testing program and the provision of instructions? Is that still going to remain in the private sector? I couldn't tell from the minister's answer if he was concerned and they're going to take it away from the private sector and put it into a bureaucratic government sector.
Mr. Speaker, the private sector has that responsibility now totally at lack of authority or lack of enforcing the provincial authority. It's something that's gradually deteriorated to the extent that we have this variety. We have, and my estimates that were before the House indicated that the government is taking over government testing, and will be that way until, working with the industry, we can establish standards whereby we can then put it back out and have a correct policing of that to ensure that the standard is consistent.
Mr. Speaker, has the minister given any consideration to some type of self-study and self-administered test for people who have never had driver training ever? Like we used to say in the old days, you get your driver license through the mail. Now, I've made this pitch, Mr. Speaker, many years ago, and I'll keep doing it. Even if we just had a self-administered test for some people to upgrade their driving habits would help. Has the minister given any consideration to such a program?
Mr. Speaker, we have no formal program as such, but the new driving manual will be set up in the sense that people could test themselves. They can drop into any one of the motor vehicle offices where there is a computerized testing thing and run through that if they wish to prepare themselves for that. But I'd like to talk with the member after a question period and discuss his proposal.
Mr. Speaker, finally, can the minister indicate what effort the minister or the department are giving to the defensive driver training programs to encourage people, strongly encourage people, to take the defensive driving courses.
Mr. Speaker, I recommend the defensive driver program as well. And in designing the new curriculum with the Driving Association, part of the curriculum will be along that line. Also, they're looking at certain credits being given for the defensive driving class as well.
Thank you. Supplementary. Vermillion Viking, main question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This question today is to the Minister of Social Services. Over the years, the public has consistently voiced their concerns with some individuals that may be accessing welfare questionably. Last year, in the fall of 1987, you implemented some pilot projects to attempt to control welfare abuses. Could you bring us up to date on these projects?
Mr. Speaker, in answer to the honourable member's question, I believe we had some 1,500 cases reviewed. This was by way of a verification process and also a client reporting card. And our information from the verification process, Mr. Speaker, and that deals with the review of files, is that I believe it was on average some 350 individual client files. We noted overpayments and approximately the same number that we noted underpayments. And this, I suppose, could be noted as anywhere from clients not reporting all income to possibly social workers not having asked all the appropriate questions to get information, particularly when one looks at the underpayments that were discovered, Mr. Speaker. As well, there were a few cases that are believed still being investigated in terms of potential fraud.
Thank you. Supplemental, were there any cases actually closed as a result of this project?
Mr. Speaker, there would have been, particularly from the client reporting card pilot project, over 200 cases, as I recall, closed. The interesting point to be made, as I recall, Mr. Speaker, is that it was discovered in a large number of cases that people didn't live at the address that was reported on their file.
Could the minister indicate then, if there were so many clients that were not properly reporting their address and other changes in their lives, then how is the department ensuring better reporting between the clients and their social workers now?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we will be going more heavily into the client reporting card area, and for those people who do not respond, it is similar to the Unemployment Insurance Commission's operation. I understand that within several weeks those cases will be closed.
Very good. Final supplementary. Is there any intent to continue or to expand these projects to ensure that we continue to address the issue of welfare abuse?
Mr. Speaker, based on that information that came from the two pilot projects, we are presently hiring, it will amount to about 67 man-years for the fiscal year that we are in, because we believe that in terms of both benefits to the clients, where we have seen underpayments, and as well the taxpayers of this province, because there was a significant number of dollars, in our view, that went out inappropriately, and it certainly needs to be there for the benefit of other people who may be in need in the future.
Edmonton Goldbar.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister, in circumstances where there's been an overpayment due to worker error, is the client required to make restitution, to make repayments, and how is the client already destitute expected to do that?
Mr. Speaker, on occasions there is a small payment deducted each month from a particular client if we believe that on balance there should have been more appropriate reporting. And I would say that it doesn't just fall at a time when we believe it is solely worker error.
Edmonton Calder.
Supplementary to the Minister, in view of the fact that many individuals have tremendous difficulty getting hold of their social worker if they have been overpaid, I'd ask the Minister, what action has she taken to increase the numbers of income security workers so that these problems can be dealt with?
Mr. Speaker, we believe that we have a reasonable number of income security workers in place. One of the problems that we have had in several of the large offices relates to the telephone system, and that is now being looked at.
Thank you. Main question, Edmonton Strathcona, followed by Calgary Buffalo.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs. When the Minister set up her Committee on Fair Dealing in 1986, Mr. Speaker, in the wake of several financial disasters in Alberta, she was prudent enough to appoint to the committee one consumer advocate amongst the civil servants who otherwise made up the committee. That is placing the chicken amongst the foxes, doubtless, Mr. Speaker, but a savvy chicken, I think we can all agree. Now we learn, Mr. Speaker, that of the 3 recommendations made by this consumer advocate, 2 have been rejected, and the 3rd is receiving further study. To the Minister, Mr. Speaker, can the Minister tell us if she considers that the concept of sales commission is so abstruse that there would be no point in making a requirement that the amount of it be stated in all investment contracts where it's applicable?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member's reference to Sally Hall, who is immediate past president of the Consumers Association of Canada, is indeed apt. She is a most able advocate for consumer interests and a person with whom I enjoy working greatly. The Committee on Fair Dealing and its internal deliberations, I do not have any more knowledge of than that which appeared in an article in the newspaper last week, and which I think outlined much of what the honourable member is alluding to. I'm pleased to see that they are deliberating and debating the many issues that do exist, and before they bring their recommendations to me and then through me to the government. One of the struggles that everyone today is having to face is the very much more complex and confusing financial services market. We no longer have a simplistic market which is easily recognizable by any one of us out there. It's sort of a supermarket of financial services and products. And my question to the Committee on Fair Dealing is simple. That is, how do we, if at all, as government, intervene to the extent that we make this marketplace more accessible in an informed way for the consumers, so consumers can make their choices, but of course before you can make choices you need to have the information. So as I understand it, the committee is looking at a number of different mechanisms to do that. One, most particularly, of course, is plain English or fair language. Others, I take it from that article in the newspaper that the honourable member and I read, were other suggestions also intended to empower the consumer.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy that the Minister has been able to keep up with what's been going on in the department by reading in the newspaper. But will she perhaps tell us what considerations would make it reasonable that a potential investor not be required to sign an acknowledgement that the deposit he or she is about to make is uninsured, if that is the case?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member knows as much about the subject as he has read in the newspaper, and that is the extent to which my commentary goes. This is a committee that has on it representatives of consumers, representatives of several departments within government because it crosses departmental boundaries, also has representatives from several of the financial institutions in the marketplace, including banks, including securities dealers, large and small, including trust companies, including insurance companies. We are asking them all to discuss these very complicated issues. These people are discussing them as an advisory committee to the minister. I have not been there debating it with them. I have put it to them to debate it and then bring the recommendations forward to us. The debate on their recommendations I expect to be full and complete. It is not something, however, that I have been participating in because I have asked for the community and those representatives of various communities to get together and discuss among themselves. I know that it's been a long process to date, and I know that it is going to continue because it is a very complex issue. But I am not going to stand here and preempt any of their conclusions, nor am I going to stand here and preempt any of the debate on their recommendations or the response that the government may or may not bring forward in having received those recommendations, simply because one honorable member of this assembly sees one article in one newspaper and then raises the questions.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's fair enough if the concepts really are complicated, but to take a really simple one, what consideration makes it reasonable to give to a purchaser of an investment contract less time for reconsideration than the purchaser of, say, a Vegematic?
Stampede. Mr. Speaker, I reiterate, the debate on the recommendations that will be brought forward by this committee will be full and complete. And the honorable member's opinion, as he is expressing it now, is one that we will note. And if he wishes to have further input into that committee, I would encourage him to write to Mr. Patrick Cashin, who is a member of the Securities Commission, and put his views forward.
I appreciate that invitation, Mr. Speaker, and perhaps I could make up my mind about it if the honourable minister would tell us this. Can she give some real evidence that this committee is really on the side of the consumer and not at least as much on the side of the people, the conservative supporters, let us say, in the financial industry?
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me answer the question this way. That committee's mandate is for all of Alberta and the various communities of interest in Alberta. Nearly all communities of interest have a majority of conservative supporters in this province.
Thank you, Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, will the minister commit to ensuring that whatever new regulations she implements as a result of this particular study and whatever other processes she has implemented, will she commit that those regulations will apply not only to financial institutions incorporated in Alberta, but also to financial institutions incorporated elsewhere but operating in Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, we're a far distance from writing the regulations, and again I underline there will be a full and complete debate. The philosophical approach, if you like, that we are taking, however, is that in the new financial services market, we must not be looking at these as from a regulatory point of view, from an institutional point of view, but we must be looking at it from a functional point of view. Insofar as the consumer is now presented with an array of options, both in products and in services, and we would be looking to facilitate informed, rational decisions on the part of the consumer, which necessitates, in our view at least, a functional approach.
Have Calgary-Buffalo, main question.
Thank you. This is to the Minister of Career Development and Employment. The Minister's $7 million Alberta Business and Community Development program is part of a growing empire of discretionary giveaway programs, which along with the lottery programs are subject to pork barrel and abuse. Now, in the last 3 months, the Minister's Department has given a number of grants to motels, truck stops, and other businesses, which are nothing more than gifts of public money to projects which would have taken place anyway, and they do provide a nice opportunity for government MLAs to hand out checks. I'm wondering what benefit the minister would like to advise the people of this province that we received from a government grant that was made in February of this year of $33,600 to Il Russ Aggregates of Calgary towards a total cost of $568,000 to build a manufacturing plant.
Jobs, Mr. Speaker.
Hey, right. Well, We also, well, that's nice. We'd all appreciate receiving that for jobs. We also have a grant this month of $32,000 to the Red Hat Holdings in Medicine Hat towards the $500,000 cost of a truck stop project near Medicine Hat. Now, was the minister saying that grants, which are only about 6% of the total cost of these projects, are necessary to make these projects go and to create jobs as opposed to being gravy for enterprising businesses which recognize a good thing when they see it, talking about welfare?
Mr. Speaker, I can't recall if the Honourable...
Time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions? Opposed? Carried. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, during my department's estimates, the Alberta Business and Community Development Program was discussed in this legislature. Now, I don't know whether the Honourable Gentleman was here or not at that time, but certainly we had a discussion about that program and how it creates jobs. That's the bottom line for that program, Mr. Speaker. I guess it's another way of providing a wage subsidy for employment in this province. I'd prefer to see, rather than a straight wage subsidy, that we have a look at the project and make a determination at that time as to whether or not it's appropriate to put job creation dollars into those projects. They all created jobs, Mr. Speaker. The intent of the program was to be sure that skilled tradesmen in this province during an economically difficult time were continued to be used in both community, nonprofit, and business ventures. It's been very successful to that end.
Well, is the minister then prepared to tell all businesses with some construction project in hand to knock at his door and get a government grant of 6% of the total cost of their project through his ABCD program then?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I do the best I can to advertise across the width and breadth of this province of our job creation programs. Certainly, as a result of the uptake of that program, I would suggest that there is wide knowledge of that program. We have a very careful assessment of the project, Mr. Speaker, and make sure that the bottom line is job creation. The individuals that work on the project must be contracted out by the owners of the business, and it also has a large component. The priority component, Mr. Speaker, is for in the community.
The fact is that only 5 or 6 favored projects have got that help, and I'm wondering how the minister justifies discrimination which favors and gives advantages to some businesses over the benefits to their competitors.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't know what the honourable gentleman is talking about. I can't recall any suggestion that there's discrimination under the program. If it's a worthwhile project, if it creates jobs, and it contributes to the economy of this province, we'll consider it. Now, if the honourable member has an example of a business that was turned down in deference to the other ones that were approved, I'd certainly look at it, but I frankly, Mr. Speaker, think he's blowing smoke.
Thank you. Edmonton, Strathcona.
A supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister. In view of the fact that this is a class of grant that does not come before the Assembly before it's made, what steps, Mr. Speaker, is the Minister taking now to make sure that the money, when passed on to other ministers, is spent legally by them?
I don't pass money on to other ministries, Mr. Speaker. The money goes directly to the communities, the nonprofit organizations, or the small businesses that access the programs. I recall no grants to government ministries or MLAs.
Question period on June the 22nd. Question related to the Minister of Energy was taken as notice. Minister of Energy to now give supplementary information in response to the question by the member Clover Bar.
Mr. Speaker, on June 22nd, the member from Clover Bar asked the Premier a question regarding Alberta Energy Company's offering to purchase the remaining shares of Chieftain Development Company and the location of their headquarters. In the Premier's response, he assured the honourable member that there will be at least as many jobs in Edmonton as before, and that is accurate. In fact, it's anticipated that further employment will occur in the Edmonton area, as well as other parts of the province in the years ahead. In fact, the merger will result in an expanded Edmonton-based international operations under the leadership of Mr. Stan Milner, currently the president of Chieftain, and that the growth and development of the merged oil and gas assets will provide many opportunities for growth in the future. Mr. Speaker, while I'm on my feet, I'd like to correct an error that I made in responding to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition earlier. I'd indicated in my response...
Just half a moment, Mr. Minister. Does Clover Bar wish to ask an additional supplementary with regard to the main issue of Chieftain? No. Thank you. Proceed then, Honourable Minister.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I indicated in my response that about 12% of California gas comes from Alberta. In fact, 12% of the Southern California gas comes from Alberta. In fact, the overall market is 23%. Alberta Gas holds approximately 23% of the California market, and it's split 40% for Northern California and 12% for Southern California.
Chair believes the additional information was in reply to the question raised by the member for Red Deer South. Time for question period has expired. Orders of the day.